People that have gone on Tinder dates, what was your worst and weirdest experiences? Story 1. We went on 3 dates, and things were going fine. Then, when she asked to see me again, I told her I was visiting family and wouldn't be available until the following weekend. That's when things took an unexpected turn. She sent me a long, emotional message, 7 pages, telling me I had ruined what could have been a perfect relationship and that she still wanted to marry me if I just put her first. It didn't stop there. She left me a voicemail of herself singing "You Got It Bad" by Usher, while crying and repeatedly saying she loved me. A couple of days later, she sent me pictures of her burning a bucket list she had made for us. Needless to say, I'm grateful I got out of that situation unscathed. Story 2. I met this girl who seemed really cool. She was into cars, guns, and she drank and cussed like a sailor. I was excited. She texted me one day, saying she was heading to a car meet and was going to pick me up. I was down for that. She arrived, and when I went outside to greet her, I was in for a shock. Her online pictures had definitely played some tricks. I tried to keep my cool and quickly thought of a plan. I went back inside, grabbed my roommate, and said, "I messed up. I need you to call me with an emergency." He laughed but agreed to help. We left for the car meet, but not long after, I got the call. My roommate, playing his part, said something serious about a family emergency, and I had to act panicked. I told her I had to go, and we raced back to my place. When we got there, my roommate was holding an empty bottle and pretending to be in the middle of a meltdown, complete with an unloaded prop in his hand. She bolted. Moral of the story: always have a backup plan. Story 3. I met a girl who turned out to be even better looking than her photos, which was a nice surprise. We went on a simple date, just dinner and a walk, and it went well. The next day, she invited me to her friend's birthday party downtown as her plus one. I wanted to go, but I had to work the next day and didn't want to stay out too late. She suggested I park at her house and stay over, so I agreed. At the party, things were going great until suddenly she lost her cool and stormed out of the bar, leaving me there. I was confused and drunk, standing with her friends. One of them said, "She wants you to go after her." I responded, "It's our second date. I'm not doing that." Not one person blamed me. I stayed at the party, switched to water, and hung out with her friends. Funny enough, I still hang out with them regularly, and they don't talk to her anymore. Story 4. I've had a few awkward Tinder dates, but the worst was with a guy who had basically grown up on the computer. I don't mind gaming as a hobby, but when it dominates your life, that's where I draw the line. We arranged to meet for coffee, but he insisted on going to a shopping complex, despite the fact that he didn't drive. He ended up being about 30 minutes late. When we finally met, he was so nervous that he was shaking and barely able to speak. I tried to be understanding, so we sat down for sushi, but the conversation was painful. I asked questions and he gave 2-word answers, even about video games, which I had some knowledge of. It felt more like an interrogation than a date. Suddenly he perked up and said, "I have to go. There's a LAN party starting." He left abruptly. The next morning at 4:30 a.m., I was working my shift when he walked into the restaurant with some friends. They didn't recognize me and were loudly talking about bitches and how fake gamer girls had ruined their LAN party. They left a huge mess, which I had to clean up. Later, I received a message from him asking to meet up again. When I declined, he called me a fat B**********. Safe to say, I never saw him again. Story 5. After ending a tough relationship, I decided to give Tinder a try for something more casual. I got plenty of responses, but none of the dates were great. Feeling frustrated, I decided the next 5 people to ask me out would all get a yes. Bad idea. The first guy suggested we meet in the city, which was 45 minutes away. I agreed and we met up. He looked like his pictures, and we made small talk. Right away, I could tell we weren't a great match. He had no interest in traveling, which I love, and he only liked obscure sports. Still, I decided to stick with it. The whole time, he bragged about how much money he made, even putting down his friend for only making $60K a year. Meanwhile, I made half of that. By the time we reached lunch, I was ready to leave, but then he made it even worse. We went to a $1 taco spot, which would have been fine, but he looked me up and down and said, "You gotta earn your meals first," giving me a creepy smile. I pretended to get a phone call and made my exit, but he insisted on walking me to my car. As I was getting into my car, he leaned in for a kiss, mouth wide open, tongue out. To make it even more awkward, his shorts didn't exactly hide his enthusiasm. I was so caught off guard that I laughed right in his face. Oops. I quickly got in my car and drove away. Story 6. I matched with this guy, and although we didn't have much in common, he convinced me to go out with him after a bit of persistence. That should have been the first red flag. I reluctantly agreed, thinking maybe I was being too picky. We went to get sushi and the conversation was terrible. He gave one-word answers to everything I asked and we had zero chemistry. After dinner, I insisted on paying half and we left. That's when things got weird. He grabbed my arm aggressively and insisted we go to a coffee shop. I politely declined, saying I had to study, but he wouldn't take no for an answer and practically dragged me inside. Once seated, he didn't even order anything. Instead, he slipped his hand between my legs under the table. Horrified, I quickly got up, told him I was leaving, and headed to my car. As I was walking away, he asked, "So when can we go out again?" I almost laughed but kept it polite, saying, "I just don't think we have much in common." That's when he lost it, yelling insults and cursing at me. When I got home, he sent me several angry texts, and to top it off, his roommate messaged me too, blaming me for upsetting him. It was a shocking experience, but I laughed it off with my roommates later. Story 7. I matched with a guy who seemed decent at first. We exchanged numbers and started talking. He told me about his cat, who was sick, and how he was really worried. I could understand that, but then things took a strange turn. He started talking about how much his cat meant to him and how he didn't know what he'd do if she died. At one point, he even hinted that he might hurt himself unless I could take his cat's place in his life. That was my cue to stop talking to him. Unfortunately, he kept messaging me. When his cat eventually passed away, he messaged me again, saying he needed someone to talk to and even suggested we meet at his cat's funeral. I didn't respond. His final message? A disturbing and graphic description of how he consumed his cat's ashes. Needless to say, I blocked him and moved on. Story 8. This girl and I hung out twice, and both times were pretty fun. When I reached out for a third time, she said she was trying to figure out how to get to the hospital. Apparently, her medication got lost in the mail, and she ended up feeling so faint, she nearly passed out and hit her head. Twice. Not wanting to leave her in that situation, I took her to the ER and stayed with her for about 6 hours while she got checked out. Despite the circumstances, we had a great conversation and even added each other on social media. Health-wise, she ended up being okay. After that, though, she got super flaky. She wouldn't respond to texts for days and kept canceling plans. I took the hint and moved on. She was fun, but way too chaotic for a long-term thing. Still, it would have been nice to hang out a few more times. Story 9. I met this girl at a local pub, and everything seemed fine at first. We ordered chicken fingers, but as the conversation fizzled out, I noticed something odd. She was tearing the chicken apart and putting the breading into her purse. Confused, I asked her what she was doing. She smiled and said, "Oh, I'm just feeding Sammy," and then pulled out a chinchilla from her bag. The chinchilla sat on the table, just chilling, while I awkwardly played with it. She seemed annoyed that I was giving attention to her pet, so back into the purse it went. After that strange interaction, she mentioned she wanted ice cream, so we headed to a nearby Ben & Jerry's. At the ice cream shop, she randomly told me about her nipple piercings. And before I could react, she pulled down her shirt in the middle of the store to show me. I kept a straight face, but I was definitely ready to leave. As I walked her to her car, she kissed me, if you could call it that. Her lips were stiff, and she licked my teeth, which was just bizarre. For some reason, I added her on Facebook afterward. She even had a Facebook page for her chinchilla, which had more friends than I did. A few months later, the chinchilla passed away, and its page became a memorial. I liked one of her posts, and she called me, crying. I unfriended her after that, but not the chinchilla. Story 10. I matched with this girl on a dating app, and we flirted for a few days before deciding to meet up. She had a puppy, and I thought, who doesn't love puppies? So I invited her to bring it along. When she showed up, though, she looked nothing like her pictures, and her puppy was, let's say, a bit of a handful, completely untrained and causing chaos. Trying to make the best of it, we decided to go out and buy some cookie dough. When we returned, my roommate was outside, exhausted and sweaty. He told me that the dog had run out the door as soon as it was opened, and he had been chasing it all over the place. Thankfully, he managed to catch it, but he warned me that I needed to see what had happened inside. I walked into my apartment and the smell hit me instantly. The dog had gotten into everything. It had jumped all over the couch, leaving a mess everywhere. Then I went to my bedroom. The dog had completely ruined my bed, rolling around in its mess. At this point, I was in shock but tried to stay calm. The girl started crying, clearly upset, so I helped her clean up the disaster. After things settled down, we baked the cookies and watched a movie to try and salvage the night. Eventually, she motioned toward my bedroom and we headed in. But guess what? Her dog followed us and jumped right back onto my bed, this time peeing in the middle of it. I just cleaned it up again, not even reacting at this point. But to my surprise, things took a positive turn after that. Let's just say she really went out of her way to make up for the chaos her dog caused, and I've never experienced anything quite like it. We fell asleep and she left the next morning. I haven't spoken to her since, but that was one wild night I won't forget anytime soon. Story 11. My roommate and I were really into dating apps during college. One night, he invited a girl over to our apartment. They went into his room while I hung out in the living room watching TV. At one point, he came out to grab a bottle of wine and some glasses and casually told me, "She's a little wild." I didn't think much of it and continued watching my show. A little while later, I started hearing them arguing. My roommate came out, clearly upset, saying, "She's poking holes in my stuff and ripping my shirt." I told him to go back and ask her to leave. But then things escalated when she locked him out of his own room. She refused to open the door and kept shouting that it was his fault. After trying to reason with her for 15-20 minutes, my roommate decided to call the police. When they arrived, they asked her to open the door, but she didn't believe they were cops. After a back and forth, she eventually opened the door but became aggressive toward the officer. It ended with her being taken out of the apartment, screaming. A few months later, my roommate ended up matching with her again on the dating app, and they met up once more. Go figure. Story 12. A few years ago, after getting out of a bad relationship, I jumped into online dating. On my first day, I matched with a girl who looked a lot like my ex, which probably wasn't a great idea, but I couldn't help myself. We decided to meet up for coffee, but things were going so well that I suggested we go grab dinner. We had a great time, splitting a burger, and she suggested we continue the night by heading to a bar. We went to a bar, and I opened a tab before excusing myself to use the restroom. When I came back, there were 6 shots and 2 beers on the table. She grinned and said, "I thought you wanted to party." Trying to keep up, I drank a couple of shots, but she downed hers quickly and then started getting a little too comfortable. At one point, she pressed up against me and started undoing my belt in the middle of the bar. I quickly pulled away, telling her that things were moving too fast. That's when she casually mentioned, "I've been with over 200 guys, and no one has ever said no before." I was floored and decided I had to leave. As I was heading out, she followed me, saying she didn't know how to get home because she lived far away. I couldn't just leave her there, so I offered to let her crash at my place. Unfortunately, I had a friend staying over for the night, and I knew this was going to get awkward. Once we got to my apartment, she passed out on the couch. A few hours later, I woke up to find her trying to initiate things again, which made me very uncomfortable. I had to firmly push her away, and she started crying, talking about how much she missed her ex-husband. At this point, my friend walked in and gave me the most disapproving look. The next morning, the girl was back to her cheerful self, suggesting we go out for brunch. I politely walked her out the door and never looked back. Story 13. I was 21 when I started talking to this girl named Valerie. She was beautiful, and we had so much in common. After a few days of texting, we decided to meet up at a hookah bar. We had an amazing time talking and laughing all night. By the end of the night, we had even attracted a group of strangers who joined us. It was easily the best date I'd ever been on. We made out before parting ways, and she promised to call me the next day. The following night, I went back to the hookah bar with a friend, and to my surprise, Valerie was there. We hugged and kissed, but then the manager came over and asked her to leave. I was confused, but she left without much fuss. Later, the manager explained that Valerie was actually 13 years old. I was in shock. She had seemed much older, and it didn't cross my mind that she could be that young. I immediately cut contact. A few months later, I ran into her again at a fast food place, but I made sure to keep my distance. Story 14. My profile picture on a dating app was of me holding my cat, but I had some fun with it by poorly photoshopping a Pikachu over the cat. It was obviously a bad job, so bad, it looked like I had physically taped a Pikachu onto the picture. When I matched with a girl, she insisted that Pokemon were real and kept asking where I got mine. At first, I thought she was joking, so I played along, thinking she was just being quirky. We eventually went on a date, and things seemed to be going well. After the date, we went back to my place, and I introduced her to my cat. That's when she asked where the Pikachu was. I had completely forgotten about the earlier conversation, but she hadn't. She seemed genuinely upset when I explained that it was just a joke. Even showing her the original photo with my bad Photoshop job, she got mad, called me a liar, and left. A few minutes later, she returned, realizing that I had driven us, and she needed a ride home. It was awkward, but one thing led to another, and we ended up having a romantic moment. Afterward, she was still upset about the whole Pikachu thing and demanded I take her home. We drove in silence, and that was the last time we spoke. To this day, I'm still unsure if her friends put her up to the whole Pikachu is real thing or if she actually believed it. Story 15. I hadn't been in the dating scene for a while, so I decided to try out a dating app. I matched with a girl who lived 2 hours away, and we quickly hit it off. After chatting for a bit, we decided to meet up. When I picked her up, I noticed right away that something felt a little off. She suggested we grab coffee, so we went to a nearby coffee shop where she downed a triple shot espresso in seconds. Then she suggested we drive out to a secluded spot for some private time, which sounded fine at first. Things were getting pretty heated when suddenly there was a knock on the window. I looked over to see an older man standing outside, holding a shotgun. He motioned for me to roll down the window, and not wanting to cause any trouble, I did as he asked. In a slow southern drawl, he said, "This ain't no place for that." I quickly apologized, got us out of there, and drove away as fast as I could. The girl was quiet for the rest of the drive, but before she got out of the car, she threw me $20 and then got sick all over the sidewalk. I've never heard from her again, and I haven't used that app since. Story 16. I matched with someone late at night, and after just a few hours of chatting, she asked if I wanted to meet up at an IHOP parking lot about an hour away. It was 2 a.m., and I figured, why not? She mentioned bringing a friend along for safety, which I understood, but it did make things feel a bit awkward. When I arrived, I saw her and her friend waiting by the car. She wasn't exactly what I expected based on her photos, but I had driven all that way, so I wasn't going to turn back. We exchanged some awkward small talk, and her friend didn't seem interested in stopping me from doing anything sketchy. He just sat in the car. After a bit, she invited me back to her brother's house, which raised some red flags. I tried to keep the mood light, but something didn't feel right. I politely declined and left, knowing I had dodged a bullet. 10 minutes later, I got a message from her saying, "You missed your chance," accompanied by an inappropriate picture. That was the end of that. Story 17. I was new to online dating and hadn't yet learned some of the basic rules, like meeting for coffee on the first date. I matched with a guy who seemed normal when we chatted, so I agreed to go out for dinner and a movie with him. He picked me up from my place, which I now know was another mistake. From the moment we got in the car, I realized something was off. He kept talking about his job, but nothing he said made sense for an accountant. Then he started talking about his last relationship, which had lasted only 3 weeks, but he spoke about it like it was a long-term thing. For dinner, he took me through the drive-thru at McDonald's, and then we headed to a movie marathon at a drive-in theater. I was already planning my escape when, during the movie, he put his hand on my leg, and I quickly pushed it away. He assured me he wasn't going to do anything inappropriate, but I was beyond uncomfortable. After sitting through 2 movies, I told him it was getting late and I needed to go home. On the drive back, he asked if I wanted to be his girlfriend, and I awkwardly said, "Maybe let's see how things go." The moment we got to my place, I bolted inside and blocked him on everything. A few months later, he messaged me again as if we had never met. I reminded him of the date, and he quickly backed off. Safe to say, I learned my lesson about first dates after that. Story 18. During my first week on a dating app, I matched with a girl I'll call Molly. Her profile pictures were so stunning, they could bring a tear to a grown man's eye. We texted for about 2 to 3 weeks, and although our messages were flirty, they never crossed into anything inappropriate. We talked about meeting up, but our schedules kept clashing. Finally, after weeks of planning, we both had a free Friday night. I told her I'd take her out for dinner and drinks so we could finally meet in person. I picked a new bar downtown that was known for its great food and craft beer, which she said she loved. That night, I went through my usual pre-date routine, workout, sauna, shower, and then headed out, excited like a kid on their way to a candy shop. When I got to the bar, she texted that she'd be there in 5 minutes. I ordered a drink and waited. When she arrived, I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see someone who looked different. She introduced herself as Molly, and while the conversation was friendly, It became clear that the pictures she used online were a bit misleading. She explained that she didn't think guys would swipe right if they saw the real her. I was disappointed, but I didn't want to be rude. We had a nice dinner, shared some laughs, and at the end of the night, I walked her to her car. She invited me over to her place for some wine, but I politely declined, saying I had plans with my sister in the morning. Since then, she's been sending me pictures I wasn't exactly asking for on Snapchat, but for some reason, I keep opening them. Story 19. I matched with a girl who seemed nice enough in her photos, so we arranged to meet for a quick bite to eat. When we finally met, I realized she looked a bit different from her pictures, but I decided to give it a chance. She wasn't a bad person, maybe a little quiet, but that didn't bother me. After dinner, we went back to my place. Unfortunately, what followed was one of the most awkward experiences I've ever had. She didn't really engage during any part of the evening. While I was trying to create a connection, she just lay there, barely moving or interacting. Even though she seemed to enjoy herself, the lack of participation made things incredibly uncomfortable. Afterward, she smiled and said, "That was fun." We texted for a few days, and she later asked why I hadn't done more, hinting at wanting something more adventurous. But the lack of communication and engagement left me feeling that it wouldn't have been appropriate. It was just a strange experience overall. Story 20. This happened recently. I matched with a girl on a dating app who seemed nice, and we got along well over chat. We decided to meet up at a coffee shop that was within walking distance of my apartment. When I met her, I realized she hadn't been entirely honest about her appearance. And to be fair, things didn't go great on the date. Still, since I had walked there, she offered to drive me home. I accepted, and when she later texted me, I politely let her know that I didn't feel a connection. The next night, she unexpectedly showed up at my place for what she called a date, something we never discussed. She continued to behave oddly, trying to introduce herself to my friends as my girlfriend, and even reaching out to a girl I was genuinely interested in, telling her not to talk to me. After that, I blocked her on everything. Thankfully, I haven't heard from her since, but it was enough to make me disable my dating app account for good. Story 21. I've had some strange dating app experiences, but this one takes the cake. I had been talking to a girl who looked a bit like an actress, Kat Dennings, based on the pictures she sent me. After chatting for about a week, she told me her hot water heater had broken, so I offered for her to come over and use my shower, thinking it'd be a nice gesture. When she arrived, I was shocked. She didn't look anything like her pictures. Still, I didn't want to be rude, so I invited her in and put on Guardians of the Galaxy while we talked. She immediately told me she wasn't into nerdy stuff, but since I liked the movie, I left it on. While I tried to make conversation, she spent the entire time on her phone, on the dating app, talking to other people. Eventually, she asked to use my shower. After 45 minutes, she texted me from the bathroom, saying that things had gotten real in there. I was confused until she added that my massaging shower head was, well, to her liking. At that point, I had enough. I was ready to ask her to leave when she came out and said she had to go. After she left, I discovered she hadn't flushed the toilet. I texted her to let her know, and she tried to blame it on my cat, saying he had puked on her shoes, which wasn't true. That was the last time I used that particular dating app. Story 22. She claimed to be renting a house, had a car, a job, and a 3-year-old daughter. She was very protective of her daughter and didn't want me to meet her until she was sure our relationship would work out, so her daughter wouldn't get attached and then potentially heartbroken. She told me that the father of her daughter had passed away from an illness before her child was born, and that she hadn't dated anyone since. Whenever we went out, she said her daughter stayed at home, and for the reasons mentioned, I never got to enter the house she claimed to rent. We would meet outside or at a nearby park. We dated for a little over a month. She told me she worked from home, so she could occasionally stay at my place for a few days. I would visit her on the weekends since I had a regular office job. After dating for a while, we planned to hang out one weekend, but she told me things got complicated. According to her, she had co-signed for a friend's car, and when the friend didn't make the payments, she had to cover it, which left her short on rent. She was worried about being kicked out, so I offered to help with her rent, about $150, and we agreed she would pay me back later. One night, we hung out with a friend of hers, and after the friend left, I realized $300 was missing from my house. I confronted her, and she explained her friend had a problem with kleptomania. I told her I didn't have a problem with her friend if she could just return the money. She assured me she would handle it. 2 weeks later, She came over for my birthday, and we stayed up drinking. She passed out around 6 a.m., and I knew a friend was supposed to pick her up. At 7 a.m., her phone rang, and I assumed it was that friend. I texted them back saying, "I'm her boyfriend. She's sleeping. I'll tell her to call you when she wakes up." The person replied, "I think we need to talk." We spoke on the phone, and the person told me he had been dating her for 5 months. He explained that she didn't have a house, a daughter, a car, or a job. She had multiple personality disorder, and her daughter was actually the name of one of her personalities. He also told me she had previously been involved in some questionable activities and was a compulsive liar with a history of theft. At first, I thought this guy might just be an angry ex, but in all honesty, there were signs I had ignored. It was my fault for letting myself get caught up in it. I confronted her about everything, and after that, she completely disappeared from my life. In the end, I lost $450, and for 6 months, I had to undergo medical testing. Thankfully, I'm fine, but I never got my money back. Story 23. It started with him admitting that he had been drinking all day. I made a lighthearted joke asking how he got there, and he looked at me seriously and questioned if I was really against drinking and driving, as if it was something everyone should do. He continued to down 4 beers in front of me, burping frequently and claiming it was someone else making the noise. A nearby group of people tried to chat with us, but he told them they were weird. He wouldn't let me sit in the more comfortable seat at the table, and then he started making inappropriate comments about different ethnicities. At one point, he even double-checked to confirm I was white, as if he couldn't tell due to how much he'd been drinking. He admitted he had tried to find me on social media before our date and thought about not showing up when he couldn't find me. Then he started making fun of his work clients, and even showed me pictures of them that he had secretly taken. When he went to the bathroom, I texted my friends, and they all told me to leave immediately. But instead, I ended up staying and making a questionable decision. It was winter, I had shaved my legs, and I had already left the house. While I didn't enjoy the conversation, I figured I might as well go through with it. In hindsight, I probably should have just skipped to the part where I didn't let him speak, because that would have saved me some disappointment. Story 24. I'd been chatting with a very nice girl for a week. I'm usually very busy with work, living in San Francisco with the cost of living being so high, so I juggle 4 jobs. One night, she was leaving a club party her brother was jing at, and I had just finished my shift at a restaurant. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, so we planned to meet at a bar near both of our places later that evening. She showed up with her sister-in-law as a chaperone, which I thought was completely understandable, since we were strangers meeting for the first time. However, her sister-in-law was quite intoxicated and couldn't find her phone. She borrowed my date's phone to call her husband and stepped outside to make the call. After about 10 minutes, we realized she hadn't come back, so we went outside to check on her. We couldn't find her anywhere. This area is close to Golden Gate Park, which has a known problem with homeless individuals, so we used the Find My iPhone feature. The signal was pinging across the street near a bus stop. Suddenly, the phone went dead, even though it had plenty of battery left. That's when I knew something was wrong. I called the police, which was nerve-wracking. When the police arrived, they searched the area and found the sister-in-law passed out in a corner, covered in vomit and in distress. The paramedics were called, and she was taken to the hospital. I was the one who called her husband to inform him because my date was understandably shaken. Her brother arrived at the hospital and rode in the ambulance, while my date and I took an Uber to the ER. It turns out that she had been drugged at the club, but fortunately, the hospital test came back negative for any harm beyond the intoxication. While we were waiting in the ER, a commotion broke out when someone started fighting with security, and we had to be locked in an exam room for our safety. Despite everything, my date and I ended up having a long conversation about superhero movies while waiting. Her sister recovered, and I finally walked home at 5 a.m. after one of the most eventful dates of my life. Story 25. I matched with a girl on Tinder who seemed interested and ready to hang out. We decided to meet at an off-campus party. She suggested we share some bourbon, which I thought was a great idea, so I brought a couple of bottles to the party. Before she arrived, my roommate and I had already started drinking, so by the time she showed up around 9:30, we were feeling pretty good. She brought along a friend to make sure everything was safe, which was a smart move. A little while into the party, she and I started kissing, and we decided to head to the back room for some privacy. Everything was going well until my friend, who lived at the apartment, walked in on us and understandably freaked out, throwing us out of the room. At that point, I blacked out and came to an hour later, still trying to get things going, but dealing with the effects of too much whiskey. Eventually, things started to get heated again when I heard loud banging on the door. I figured if I ignored it, whoever it was would leave, but the knocking continued. I thought if I opened the door confidently, the person would leave, so I opened the door. To my surprise, there was a whole group of people, and one of them was holding my date's very intoxicated friend. The person holding him made a sarcastic comment, handed him over, and left. It turns out her friend had been causing trouble all night, stealing drinks and trying to make unwanted advances on people at the party. After things got out of hand, some people had to chase him down and bring him back. From there, the situation quickly became awkward. My roommate had to keep an eye on him while I found someone to drive us back to my date's car. Eventually, we managed to get everyone where they needed to go. But the whole night was a chaotic mess. Story 26. I had been talking to this girl for a while, and we decided to meet up in the city between us to see a movie. Since my car was getting some work done, my friend dropped me off, and the plan was for her to drive me back to my dorm after the movie, where we'd spend the night. I got to the theater a little early and bought the tickets. When she arrived, she called to say she had just parked her car. We met, exchanged an awkward hug, and went in to see the movie. Throughout the film, she kept shifting towards me, but I was so nervous that I kept shifting away until I found myself squished against the side of my seat. Despite the awkwardness, the movie was great. Afterward, we walked outside laughing, only to discover that her car had been towed. She called her parents, who thought she was at a concert, not on a date, and we ended up walking 4 miles through a rough part of the city to the tow lot. She paid a $250 fine to get her car back. We decided to stick to our original plan, and she drove us back to my dorm. It was now 1 a.m., and I hadn't told her this was my first date ever. As we settled in, I put on a show we both liked to break the ice. At some point, we started making out, and things progressed. I found out she was on her period, but we decided to just roll with it. It was an awkward first date, but definitely one I'll never forget. Story 27. I had been chatting with a girl who had some really cute pictures, and we seemed to click. We decided to meet up at a juice place with a cool, healthy vibe. We had a great time, joked about how much cologne I was wearing, and laughed as we got to know each other. After about an hour, things were going well, and we decided to walk around. She took me to a place where you can rent hot tubs by the hour. I didn't have a bathing suit with me, so I just stripped down to my underwear, and so did she. She was petite and in great shape, and I was wearing athletic underwear, which, if you don't know, shows everything when it's wet. After spending some time in the tub, we decided to leave, and as I stood up, well, it was pretty obvious what was going on. She, I, and another woman who was about to get in all burst out laughing. She made a joke about taking me home, and we ended up back at my place. We spent the weekend together, watching Netflix and hanging out. It was an amazing time, and I drove her home Monday morning so she could get to work. The next weekend, we met up again, but this time she brought a friend, which I was fine with. She had already had a lot to drink by the time I got there, and she continued drinking throughout the night, talking to a bunch of people and getting more wine from older guys at the bar. By the end of the night, things got a bit chaotic. She was grabbing the steering wheel while I was driving and even jumped into my lap at one point. It was honestly pretty scary, but I managed to get everyone back to my place safely. When we finally got home, she had what I later found out was a seizure, something her friend said she sometimes experiences. I put her to bed, made sure she was okay, and then tried to entertain the rest of the group on my porch. By the time I got everyone to leave, it was morning, and my roommates were not too happy. I checked on her again, and that's when I saw the aftermath of all the wine she drank the night before. She had thrown up all over my bed. She apologized and offered to make it up to me, but at that point, I was just glad she was okay. I drove them home, cleaned up, and spent the next few days airing out my room and cleaning my mattress. Story 28. We met up at a popular restaurant on a nice fall day. Right away, I noticed she didn't look much like her pictures and seemed to have gained some weight since they were taken. It wasn't a deal breaker, so we had a pleasant conversation over dinner. I had lasagna and she had spaghetti and meatballs. We had some laughs, but nothing too romantic happened. After dinner, we decided to visit the local animal shelter to pet the dogs and cats, which was her idea. It was a fun way to spend the afternoon, and I gave her a ride home afterwards since she didn't have a car. On the way to her house, a horrible smell filled the car. At first, I thought it might be something outside, but it quickly became clear it was coming from inside the car. She had let out a fart, and the car's windows were broken, so there was no way to air it out. We awkwardly sat there, trying to pretend it wasn't happening until I finally dropped her off. She said she would invite me in, but she lived with her mom and didn't think I was ready for that yet. I wasn't ready for a lot of things that night. Story 29. I went out with a guy who asked me about my religious beliefs. I was a bit wary, but I told him I wasn't religious but spiritual. He asked what that meant, so I briefly explained that I believed in a higher power as more of an energy rather than a being. He then asked if I believed in evolution, to which I said yes. He stared at me for a moment before saying, "That's neat, but wrong." At that point, I figured this was going to go one of two ways. Either he was going to argue about atheism or push his own beliefs on me. Unfortunately, it was the latter, and things got bizarre. He started telling me that werewolves are guardian angels, vampires are regular angels, and that God is actually disguised as a well-known public figure. I couldn't tell if he was trolling or serious, but he went on and on for about an hour. I was too shy to say anything, so I just sat there. Then, he pulled out a Monopoly Junior board and suggested we play. At that point, I was ready to leave, so I politely declined. A year later, I ran into him again at a board game cafe, and he was still upset that I hadn't gone out with him again. He challenged me to a game of Monopoly, and I decided to show him how it's done. We played, and I beat him handily. In response, he called me a she-devil and flipped the board before storming out. Story 30. I matched with someone on Tinder, and we had a couple of nice dates. Things were going well, and on our third date, we were hanging out at a park when she told me she used to be a dancer in a big city. I didn't mind. Everyone has a past, and it didn't bother me. Things progressed, and we had a great connection. After about a week, she came over and told me she was pregnant. I was raised to be responsible, so I supported her decision to keep the baby. We stayed together for a little while, but she eventually broke up with me about 3 weeks later. Now a year has passed, and I'm a father to a beautiful 3-month-old girl. Her mother and I are civil, and I pay child support and spend a few days a week with my daughter. It's been a strange year, and I often wonder how different my life would be if I had swiped left instead of right. Story 31. Last summer, I was hanging out at a friend's house until midnight when I got a call from 2 buddies who live out of town. They told me a few girls were coming over, and they needed a third guy to join them. I wasn't sure at first, but they convinced me, so I went over around 12:30. The girls hadn't arrived yet, and when I asked where these girls were from, they said one of them was from Tinder, and they'd been talking all day. I was skeptical, especially since I wasn't into Tinder at the time, but I figured I'd go along with it. The girls showed up around 1:15, and to my surprise, 2 of them were pretty attractive. We started the night off by playing some beer pong and getting to know each other, and before long, we all paired up. At this point, it was around 4 a.m., and we decided to hop into the hot tub. The girls didn't bring swimsuits, so my quick-thinking friend joked, "Just take them off and hop in." And believe it or not, they did. We spent the rest of the night playing drinking games in the hot tub, and I ended up spending some alone time with one of the girls in the pool. Next thing I knew, it was 6:30 a.m., and I woke up with her asleep on my lap, both of us still in the hot tub. We ended up seeing each other for a few months after that. Story 32. I met this woman on Tinder, and we seemed to have a lot in common. After exchanging about 24 messages, she suggested we meet up for lunch. She even asked if we could meet at my house for convenience, which I didn't mind. We talked for about 5 minutes before she started getting undressed, which I also didn't mind. After that day, we began texting and calling each other constantly. For about a week, we met up every morning, spent the day together, and talked all night. It was so easy to talk to her, and our connection felt effortless. We shared life stories, goals, and dreams. It felt like we were in sync, and our chemistry was undeniable. One day, she invited me to a party at her friend's house. Her friend turned out to be a multimillionaire who lived in a mansion, and the party quickly escalated into something unexpected. Let's just say it was an unforgettable night, and things got pretty wild. After a couple of weeks, everything seemed perfect until, out of nowhere, she stopped replying to my messages. I had no idea what happened. Finally, after a week, she called me and asked to meet up at a restaurant. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She had been engaged to another guy the entire time we were seeing each other. She explained that she went off to get married, but she said that despite being happy with him, she knew I could have made her happier if I had come into her life sooner. We still talk occasionally, but I've moved on. I have a girlfriend now, and she is married to him. I'm just glad I got to experience that whirlwind of a relationship. Story 33. I started texting this guy I met on Tinder. He was good-looking, successful, and had a quirky charm. After texting all day, we decided to meet up that night. I went over to his apartment, which was beautiful, and we ended up talking for hours. After a few glasses of wine, things progressed, and we started hooking up. In the middle of everything, he said, "There's something I should probably tell you." I thought he was about to reveal something serious, but then he said, "I'm into some really kinky things." I was open to trying new things, so I asked him what he was into. He listed a few things like rough play, tying, and spanking, which didn't seem too out of the ordinary. Then he said, "I also like butt stuff. I want you to play with my butt." At first I thought he was joking, but then he got even more detailed and asked me to do some very specific things, including what he referred to as eating it like groceries. I couldn't help but laugh because it was such an unexpected request, especially for a first date. To make things worse, he spread his cheeks, and well, let's just say it was a sight I'll never forget for all the wrong reasons. I couldn't handle it anymore, so I got up and left. He texted me constantly after that, even sending a photo of himself with another woman in bed, trying to make me jealous. Needless to say, I never saw him again, but his texts still give me a good laugh. Story 34. I matched with a girl on Tinder, and after talking for a bit, we decided to meet up for dinner. We chose a chain restaurant in her town, which had some sketchy areas, but I figured it was a safe option. When she arrived, she looked quite different from her photos. She was dressed like someone much older, and her overall appearance was a little rough around the edges. I decided to stay, thinking I could still have a good time. We started talking, but she immediately launched into a 20-minute rant about how bad her day was. I tried to keep the conversation light, but then she hit me with a question that caught me off guard. "What are your benefits like?" She wanted to know all about my medical and dental coverage, which was strange for a first date. Things only got weirder from there. She complained about her ex, her job, and her car lease. The entire conversation felt like one long rant, and I was ready to end the date. As we were leaving, we saw a couple fighting in the parking lot. The guy punched through a car window, and I wanted to make sure the girl was okay. My date, however, insisted we leave and not get involved. She claimed to know them and said it wasn't worth it. I ignored her and went to check on the girl anyway. After the date, she sent me a message asking what I thought of her. I didn't respond, and the next day, she called me a jerk for not replying. That was the last I heard from her. Story 35. I had just started using Tinder and matched with someone on my first day. We were texting back and forth when she asked for a picture, so I sent her a normal photo. She responded by sending a picture that was much more revealing. I didn't mind, so we kept texting, and later that night she suggested we meet up at a restaurant. When I got there, she immediately told me she was a little drunk, which didn't seem like a good sign. Since the restaurant had already stopped serving alcohol, she ordered an iced tea. She was on her phone the whole time, ignoring me because she needed to transfer money. After a while, she said she was hungry, so I suggested we grab something from the fast food place next door. She ordered a bunch of food and ended up covered in mayonnaise by the end of the meal. At this point, I realized this wasn't going anywhere, so I politely said it was nice meeting her and we went our separate ways. Story 36. This happened a couple of months ago. I decided to meet a guy from Tinder in a busy area during the day, rather than opting for a secluded date. When I arrived, he was on the phone with a bank customer service agent and was talking to the person like they were incompetent. I thought he was just having a rough time, so I didn't think much of it. After he hung up, he asked where I parked and we started walking to my car. Once we got to my car, we sat down, and out of nowhere, he pulled out some weed and started smoking without even asking if I was okay with it. He grabbed my face and forcefully exhaled smoke towards me. At this point, I was thinking, this is not good, but I decided to play along until I could figure out how to leave safely. Suddenly, he unlocked the door, and a friend of his appeared, knocking on the window. The guy casually said, "Oh, that's my friend. Can he come in?" I reluctantly agreed, figuring he was going to come in regardless. They both wanted to get beers, so I ended up driving them to a gas station. I was about to leave them there, but they came back before I could. Now I'm feeling really uncomfortable, but before I could do anything, they decided to go to a liquor store instead. While his friend went inside, the guy started making out with me and grabbing me in a way that made me even more uncomfortable. He then started choking me, not in a playful way, but in a way that made me genuinely scared for my life. He let go and told me, "Girl, if you keep looking like that, I might just marry you." At this point, I texted my friend to call me with a fake emergency. When she called, I told them I had to go but would drop them off first. I dropped them off and thankfully only his friend got out. He started making out with me again and told me he was going to give me babies. I politely told him that wasn't going to happen, and finally he got out of the car. I drove home terrified. 2 months later, I got a call from an unknown number, and it turned out to be a collect call from jail asking about this guy. Never went on a Tinder date again. Story 37. I was in Denver on vacation with some friends. We were all single guys using Tinder, just checking out the local scene. One night, I was at a bar talking to a girl on Tinder around 1 a.m. and I convinced her to meet me there. My friends left and she showed up around 1:30. In my mind, if someone's meeting me at a bar this late, it's probably going to lead somewhere. We had a drink and she asked if we could go back to my place. Luckily, we had rented a house through Airbnb, so I agreed. We parked in front of the house, started making out, and as I was guiding her inside, she said, "Be careful, it's hard for me to walk." I was a bit tipsy and didn't think much of it. Once we got into my bedroom, I started undressing her, and when I reached to take off her shoe, she stopped me and said, "No, don't do that. It'll be hard to put back on." I was confused and looked down to realize she had a prosthetic foot. I was shocked, but she casually said, "Well, I guess I'll just do this now." She then removed both of her prosthetic legs. At that moment, I wasn't fazed. I was actually excited. We went for it, and let me tell you, it was one of the wildest experiences of my life. She felt weightless without her legs, and we had an amazing time. She even told me to choke her, which added to the craziness. After we were done, she got dressed and told me her story. She had been in a car accident a few years ago, and after climbing out of the wreck, she was hit by another car, resulting in the amputation of both her legs. As she left, I asked if it was strange that I didn't know she had prosthetic legs. She simply said, "Most people don't notice until my pants come off." Story 38. There was this girl on Tinder who seemed really cool, and she invited me to go swing dancing with her. I had never been swing dancing before and was a bit nervous about doing that on a first date, but she managed to convince me. She assured me there would be a lesson beforehand, so I figured, how hard could it be? I showed up at the venue at 6:55 p.m., right on time. I didn't see her, so I gave her a call, only to find out that she and her sister were running late and wouldn't arrive until 8 p.m. I was stunned that she hadn't mentioned this earlier, but I decided to stick around and take the lesson by myself. The lesson was harder than I expected, but I got the hang of it with the help of some kind partners. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was feeling pretty good about my new dance skills. The dance started, but my date still hadn't arrived. I texted her, letting her know where I was sitting so she could easily find me when she got there. I waited and waited. By 8:45 p.m., I was starting to get frustrated, so I texted her again to see if she was still coming. No response. Eventually, around 9:30 p.m., she texted back, saying she had been there since 8:15 but didn't see me, so she just started dancing with someone else. I was confused since I had told her exactly where I was, but she made no effort to find me. Later that night, she sent me another message. Her ex-boyfriend had shown up at the dance, and they spent the rest of the night talking. Turns out, they decided to work things out and get back together. I was left wondering why she didn't just tell me earlier. Story 39. I had been texting this girl on Tinder for a little while, and we decided to meet up. Her profile was a bit mysterious, with only 3 cropped photos of her face, but she was pretty, so I figured why not. She asked me to come to her apartment and bring some food since her car wasn't working. I stopped by a pizza place and brought a couple of pies. When I arrived, I noticed the apartment was a little sketchy, but I brushed it off. She opened the door wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, and we sat down to eat. About 20 minutes into our conversation, I heard a baby crying in the other room. When I asked if she was babysitting, she laughed and said, "No, that's my child." I was not expecting that. She handed me the baby, went to get a bottle, and then came back dressed in something completely different, a revealing outfit. I was taken aback, but tried to play it cool. She put the baby in a playpen, turned on some kids' TV show, and invited me into her bedroom. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do, but I decided to go along with it. We started hooking up, but then she put on music, Insane Clown Posse of all things. It was an experience, to say the least, but the music really killed the mood for me. Afterward, she asked if I wanted to spend the night, but I made up an excuse and left. She tried texting me a few times after that, but I eventually stopped responding. Story 40. After talking to a guy for a couple of weeks, we finally met for dinner. The evening was going well, and we didn't know what to do afterward, so he suggested going back to his place. I made it clear that we wouldn't be doing anything intimate, and he seemed to understand. Once we got to his house, we sat down and continued chatting. It was fine until I made the mistake of mentioning his divorce, which led him into a long rant about his ex-wife. He went on, and at the end of the rant, he grabbed his laptop and said, "At least she was a freak." To my horror, he started showing me explicit pictures of his ex-wife, things I really didn't need or want to see. I was completely frozen, unsure of what to do. Then he started talking about how they used to go to parties and suggested we should go to one together next weekend. I was beyond uncomfortable, so I tried to casually reach for my cigarettes. And before I could even react, he lunged at me and started kissing me. I pushed him away, freaked out, but he acted like nothing was wrong. I made small talk for a few more minutes to keep things calm before quickly making an excuse and leaving. He still texts me to this day, and I guess I need to explain to him that showing naked photos of your ex on a first date is never a good idea. Story 41. I matched with an 18-year-old high school senior on Tinder. I was 25 at the time, so I was trying to be respectful and gentlemanly, not wanting to come across as the older creep. Our first date went well, and we made plans to meet again. On the second date, we went out to eat and then took a romantic walk around a park. Things were going well, and we ended up in my car to drive her home. That's when she kissed me, and one thing led to another. She put my hand under her top, and suddenly, she said she wanted me to be intimate with her like they do in movies. At first, I didn't understand what she meant, but she already had things going, so I reached for a condom. She told me she didn't want one, and in hindsight, that's when I should have stopped. But I was young and impulsive, and we proceeded. She claimed it was her first time, and although it seemed like it might be true, things took an unexpected turn. When I was close to finishing, she kept telling me to do something I wasn't comfortable with, so instead I opted for a safer option, much to her surprise. She later explained she had a different idea of how things would go. We made plans to meet again, but something felt off, and I decided not to go. A year later, I accidentally texted her, and she replied, updating me on her life. She had finished high school, was in a relationship, and was pregnant. We exchanged pleasantries, and she invited me over, saying her boyfriend was at work. Against my better judgment, I went. She ended up suggesting we spend time together, and before I knew it, we were back where we started. Since then, we've been seeing each other secretly, and while I know it's not the right thing to do, she's incredibly attractive, and I've been making poor choices. Story 42. After ending a 6.5-year relationship, I decided to try Tinder for the first time. I matched with a guy who seemed decent, and after chatting for a while, we agreed to meet for ice cream. When I arrived at the ice cream parlor, he was already there. He looked like his pictures, so things were off to a good start. As we talked, I mentioned that I was studying to become an intellectual property attorney. He then went on a long rant about how copyright laws are pointless. It was awkward, but I let it slide. The parlor had chalkboard-painted tables with chalk, so he decided it would be a great idea to make me do a math proof with him. I wasn't interested, but I humored him. After we finished our ice cream, I thought the date would be over, but he asked if I wanted to get a drink. I agreed, hoping some liquid courage might improve the conversation. As we walked to a bar, he casually mentioned that he doesn't drink. So instead, we ended up at a coffee shop, where he spent 20 minutes telling me how much he loves Microsoft Excel. I was definitely ready to leave by this point. As we walked back to his car, he started telling me a bizarre story about a cat he once believed could see the future. Then, out of nowhere, he asked how I would prefer to die, insisting it had to be a violent end. I was beyond ready to end the date. I tried to make a polite exit, but he insisted on walking me to my friend's place, even though I said it wasn't necessary. When we finally got close to my friend's house, he leaned in for a kiss, which I dodged. I said goodbye, quickly walked away, and ran to my friend's house. Later that night, he texted me complaining about having to eat at McDonald's alone. I never responded, but he continued texting me for weeks until he finally got the hint. Story 43. My first Tinder date was definitely a weird one, but it ended up having a happy outcome. I had been chatting with this girl on and off for a couple of months, and we finally decided to meet up. When the day came, I picked her up, and we started our date by going to a dollar store to buy random things like rainbow stickers and plastic dinosaurs, which we used to decorate my truck. Afterward, we went to a thrift store, where we messed around with various knickknacks, At one point, we accidentally tricked an older man into stealing a metal bird by placing it inside an outhouse figurine. He didn't realize they didn't belong together and ended up buying both. We also bought some ridiculous CDs that we probably would never listen to again. Next, we headed to a local park, and instead of a traditional first date activity, she gave me a haircut, just for fun. We got covered in hair, so we went back to my place to clean up. While we were there, we played with a dog I was fostering. In the brief moment I stepped out of the room, she somehow managed to let the dog escape the apartment, and we spent the next 45 minutes chasing him around the complex. Finally exhausted, we checked off the last thing on our list, drawing on my truck's window with Sharpies. It was a chaotic but fun date, and by the end of the night, I dropped her off at home. Fast forward, and we've seen each other a lot since then. In fact, the next time I see her, we'll be getting engaged. So, yeah, my weird first Tinder date ended up being the start of something amazing.